for a curmudgeon like me, this is really an unusual topic to want to talk about, which is optimism in the marketplace and in society for 2024. My unscientific poll of clients and friends indicate that 2023 was a tough year financially for many of them in business. I mean, they got by, but it was not a great year. They worked harder and they made less money. So I'm in the real estate business, and all you have to do is look at the applications for mortgages and new home sales and home sales. It's down. And my associates there report that it was an off year last year. They blamed it on the lack of inventory. They blamed it on the high interest rates, but they don't have any idea when it's going to stop. So, Mike, now that the Fed has sort of, said they aren't going to jerk us around on higher interest rates anytime soon, should we take that as a sign of confidence and prosperity will return in 2024?
As another small business owner and owner of a technology firm, I'll agree, it was a challenging year. And I think a lot of technology firms, as we saw across the country, recalibrating. And I think it was difficult as people kind of came out of the pandemic, a market that did certain things, uncharacteristically, now all of a sudden had to get back to what a traditional market looked like. Plus you had interest rates and a variety of other things coming together. And I think that created real challenges. I'll say that I started, and have seen this in other sectors as well. We hit about October, November of this past year, and I started to see things moving more positively and moving in the right direction, just from a business perspective. From a personal perspective, and just, we had opportunity over the holidays to engage with lots of different folks over lots of different periods. And, clearly spending was fine. People were engaging and were spending money, and we look at that collectively across the country. And so that's usually a good indicator. I think if you look at surveys and polls, where we tend to be still so bifurcated in our country that depending upon who's asking the question, and we want to make sure that we know who's giving the answer. So we want to make sure somebody looks bad. But I think if you look at more objective measures, people are feeling more confident than they were.
Did you go to the grocery store, Mike? Come on.
I did.
I mean, if you go to the grocery store, that grocery store bill had to be 20% higher than it was the year before.
Well, but we knew that. I mean, that wasn't news. I mean, I've had to eat the entire time. It's actually growing less than it was before. So yeah, it's more, but it's less than it was.
All right. So Mark, Larry Kudlow points out that since Joe Biden took office, the average middle-class American family has lost 20% of its purchasing power. So, is there a reason for optimism in 2024?
Could I say, I think it's political malpractice of the highest order to kind of engage in denialism of looking at the data of saying, gee, everything's rosy, when in fact the public doesn't think it is. And to be sure, we had for lack of a better word, Keynesian blowout of spending. That drove demand, that drove unemployment down, that drove the economy, some indicators in a very positive direction. But as you described, Casey, it also resulted in increased inflation. And that's something that has really hit people in their pocketbook in a negative way, since their income hasn't gone up as much as the cost of living. And again, coming back to the theme of the political malpractice, I remember Bill Clinton, and I feel your pain. And this is an administration that is in denial of the fact that, they want to look at their indicators and not reflect on the wallet or pocketbook issues that a lot of Americans judge the economy by.
Well, I think Americans have a short memory because they're optimistic by nature. And so I think, going into 2024, they're looking for optimism. Again, I mentioned earlier that the Fed has decided that they're not going to adjust interest rates upward anytime soon. And that's a statement for optimism. And as Mike said in his comments, people buckle down. I mean, Americans are hardworking, and they buckle down, and they just are going to get to it, I think. And that's going to play into the general theme of 2024, and as we go into the election cycle. So it's going to be interesting to watch, especially the job numbers.
I think one of the interesting points, though, and I think I agree with you, Mark, in that I think that we've got to look at the reality. And I think the challenge that we have is that we have such wide disparity right now in our economy. And so on the one hand, interest rates are down, inflation is down, job numbers are good, GDP is good, and the stock market is amazing. And set at the same time, you look at 10% of the top 8 wage earners in the country have 66% of the wealth, 50% of the wage earners have 2% of the wealth. And so when you look at that, I think there's a real disconnect as to who's seeing what and how that's being communicated and what people are seeing. Because I think there's just such a wide gap that I think is really difficult for us as a collective to navigate through that and understand how do we address that, because it's really big.
Mark, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I agree with that. I think that it's a good point to make. I think that the ultra low interest rates had the effect of dramatically increasing those people who had assets were in a privileged position, whereas those people who didn't weren't.